this robot tip, we'll talk about the automated recovery features of Robot Console to automatically recover. For instance, if a job fails and you want to automatically have it restarted, maybe a subsystem goes down, you automatically want to have it restarted, or possibly a device failure. So in the robot solution set, we're going to be talking specifically about Robot Console, our message interception and automation technology. To do automated recovery in Robot Console, first of all, it requires Robot Console resource monitoring. So resource monitoring is the ability for Robot Console to look at a subsystem or job or a device to make sure that it's in the proper state, and if it's not, to execute some kind of action to recover. That recovery requires a rule, which we call a message set in Robot Console. And in that message set, we will incorporate something called OPAL. OPAL stands for Operator Assistance Language, and it's basically a logic operand-based decision structure that allows you to answer messages conditionally, and based on the contents of the message or the number of occurrences in a message, you can call programs, execute commands, and basically you're putting the logic in the rule for it to make decisions for you, so you don't have to manually respond to the message and take some action. So for instance, restarting a subsystem or a job that might be critical to your operation, and if for some reason it comes down, we can automatically restart that. You might need to call a program, for instance, to do some cleanup, or perhaps you receive a message that a tape device or some other device is in some kind of failure mode. So you need to respond to the message, and then you also need to recover the device through executing the vary config command. For instance, varying the device off and varying it back on, and then replying to the message. All that can be done automatically with a Robot Console rule or message set. So our visual depiction of the functionality of a Robot Console looks like this. We're going to pretty much focus on the resource monitoring capability of Robot Console, but likewise, resource monitoring will generate a message if a resource is not in the expected status. Of course, we can monitor QSysOper, but we also have an internal message queue devoted to resource monitoring. Once we have anything in the form of a message, we can then automate that message using a message set. Other functionality in Robot Console, if you're not aware, we can monitor log files in the IFS. We can also monitor other log files. The messages that are generated from Robot Console resource monitoring are specific to the type of resource that's being monitored. For instance, there's specific SBS messages for monitoring subsystems. There's specific JOB messages for monitoring jobs. Likewise, out queues, devices, and so forth also have specific message IDs. And these are all in a message file in the RBTCon library, the Robot Console library. When we detect that your resource is not in the expected status, in this case my POS monitor should be active, we send out this SBS 001 message. Subsystem's not active. And likewise, there is a job that's part of that subsystem called POS Watcher, and that's also not active. But I'm going to focus on this SBS 001 message. I need to create a rule or a message set over this message ID to reactivate the subsystem. In that rule, I will incorporate Robot Console OPAL. Robot Console OPAL is basically an if-then-else structure, and I can address the variable information that is part of the message. So in this case, I'm going to look at variable 5. Variable 5 contains the subsystem name. And if the variable 5 is either the Q programmer subsystem or the point of sale monitor, POS monitor subsystem, then I'm going to execute the start subsystem command, and I'm going to use those variables from the message. Likewise, I'm going to concatenate together some text, and I'm going to send a robot alert message using the page command off to myself to let me know what's gone on. we've restarted the subsystem. This might be best described by doing a live demo, so let's do that. I've already started the Robot Console Explorer graphical interface, and let's take a look at the components that are part of this automation. First of all, under Monitored Objects, Resource Monitors, All Resource Monitors. Here's all the various resource monitors that I have defined. I have quite a bit. A number of them are held. I'm going to drill down to the types of resource monitors. If I did, for instance, want to create a new subsystem monitor, I could just right-click on the type and select New and define where that subsystem description exists. Here's my POS monitor resource monitor description. I've identified the subsystem description, where it's located in terms of the library, and my expected status. Every resource monitor type has different sorts of expected statuses. Obviously, jobs have a lot of different expected statuses as compared with a subsystem. So I want to make sure that this subsystem is active. I'm checking at a frequency of 1, and by default 1 is every 5 minutes, 2 is every 15, 3 is 30, 4 is 60. You can change those in the system setup defaults. I can also look at the current status of all my monitored resources by looking at the Resource Monitor Status screen. I kind of liken this to a dashboard widget. All right, so it says everything's good in my world currently, but in a moment it's not going to be. Also, we're going to bring up the Message Center, where by default these messages, these resource monitoring messages, are going to be sent to. You can redirect messages anywhere you want. For instance, if you have the QSysOper Message Center, you might want to redirect your resource monitoring messages to that message center. But we're going to keep this simple to start out with and just look at the messages as they occur and are placed into our resource queue message center. All right, next we're going to just do a work subsystem command. And we can see my POS monitor subsystem is active. So I'm going to do an end subsystem POS monitor *immed. Okay, my subsystem is now ended. My dashboard widget, which shows me resource monitor statuses, updates on occasion. Again, that's set up in the system setup, but I can force a check of a resource right here. I can select that option, or I can simply double-click here. And it says the subsystem is not in the expected status. It now shows up with an X under resource status, and I've got my message. The message says that the subsystem's not active, and likewise the SBS001 message was sent. And if I look at the extended details of the message, it says that the message was processed through my message set, or my rule, SBS001 CL. All right, so let's go look at that rule. And by the way, the subsystem is already back active, and I got notified that my subsystem is active, and all that happened thanks to the message set, SBS001 CL. All right, so I'm going to look at my message sets that are released, and I'll scroll down to my SBS001 CL rule. Now, you won't have this rule on your system, but you will have two rules that are specific to resource monitoring, and that is RBC fail and RBC pass. These rules basically take the resource monitoring message, it converts it into what we call a response required message, so it shows up here in the message center, and then you have to click on reply to confirm that you've seen that message. And I'll also show you the messages that this particular rule, RBC fail, has been written over. So these are all the odd-numbered resource monitoring messages, and there's SBS0001. subsystem not in the expected status. So while this is released, I can also create a specific rule that will override this rule that's based on a table. If you create a rule that automates a single message ID, that'll override a rule that's automating a message table. All right, this rule looks like this. First of all, it says if I see the SBS001 message, what am I going to do with it? So I said we've got OPAL associated with this. And the OPAL is looking at variable 5 to identify the subsystem name. I can look to see what variable that is by looking at my message text. And it says variable 5 is the resource name. Variable 2 is the resource library. All right, so back to OPAL. I'm asking if variable 5 is equal to QProgrammer or POS monitor. If so, I'm going to execute the start subsystem command with the execute command. This command here under operation values has to be a command that can be executed in batch. It cannot be an interactive type command or interactive only. And likewise, if you use the execute operation, you can prompt the command here in OPAL to make sure it's properly formatted, to make sure the syntax is correct. And then I'm concatenating together through a OPAL variable some text so that I can send out a message to let Chuck know what happened. I may want to further qualify this OPAL by time of day. So maybe I only want to apply this between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. So we can do that. If systime is greater than or equal to 0800 and systime is less than or equal to 1700. Now, in terms of knowing all the variables and the operations that are available to you, we do have an OPAL programming guide. It's about 60 pages long. Highly recommend that you read that, and that can be found in the documentation section of our support portal. Okay, I've moved the system time qualification up to the top. And now I'm just going to say OK and recompile the OPAL program. Basically what happens now is when that message occurs, we submit a little batch job to process that message. Another example of self-healing would be if you receive, for instance, a device error message. And we intercept that instead of via resource monitoring, we intercept it via a message. So here's an example, CPA 3387, device not available. Your options for reply are either a cancel or a retry. In OPAL, I could automatically take variable 4, which is the name of the device, and execute the vary config command to vary the device off. I can use the delay operation to wait a minute, and then I can vary the device back on, and then I can reply to the device failure. Now I could further qualify this by saying if repeat is less than or equal to 3, let's say. So the message can occur 3 times. Beyond that, it's going to escalate to a human to take further action. And just so you're aware, a couple other OPAL operations that you can take advantage of are call CP. And there's actually 3 versions of the call CP operation. Basically what happens then is we'll call a program, your custom program in this case, and we'll pass a set of variables about the message that we're dealing with. So your program can do whatever recovery it needs to based on all these different parameters that are being sent to it via the call CP program. Of course, you could also simply execute the call statement but in this case we're not passing any parameters unless you do want to use the parm option on your call statement. You've now got some additional tools in your tool belt that'll help you automate your system, and that's what the robot product line is all about, automated operations. If you have questions on this or anything else regarding the robot product line, please send a message to info@fortra.com. Thanks.